Hello, I'm Rob, and welcome to the Geek Show. And today we're talking about Cloudpunk, which is out now on PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Nintendo Switch. It was released for the PC earlier this year, but it's now out on consoles as well. It's developed by Ion Lands and published by Maple Whispering, and it may, on the surface, seem like the perfect game to play in the run-up to the release of Cyberpunk 2077, which has unfortunately been delayed again, but we're not going to get into that side of things. Cloudpunk looks like your typical Cyberpunk game when you look at the trailers and you look at it from a distance, and that's what a lot of people will think until they sit down and play the game. Now, the game is set in the city of Nivalis, which is a city that has a verticality to it in kind of the mold of the city from the beginning of The Fifth Element. It also has elements of Blade Runner and other science fiction environments, cyberpunkish science fiction environments, I should say, where kind of the upper crust have become really, really corrupt, and they have their own tastes and their own desires. Think Altered Carbon as well, the kind of upper crust of Altered Carbon. But there are also people who are just trying to make ends meet, and there are people who are really living off this weird vibe that the city has. And you play the role of Rania, who is a new delivery driver for a company called Cloudpunk, which is where the game gets its name. Now, your task is to drive a HOVA through the city, which is your flying car, and you make deliveries from A to B. Sometimes you're delivering passengers, sometimes delivering packages, and sometimes those packages, you have to make a call on whether you deliver them or not. And that's because Cloudpunk, as a company, you'll find out very quickly, is not really a legal entity and is also suspected of various things, which you'll discover more of as you play the game. In a very real sense, Cloudpunk reminds me of a game called Neocab, which came out back in 2019 on the PC and Switch. That one, you basically play the role of a kind of futuristic Uber driver, and there are some similarities to Cloudpunk and Neocab, especially in kind of the aesthetic, the look of the city, and the colour palette that both games use, with the purples and the blue hues and everything like that. One of the primary characters who will be alongside Rania as she makes her way through the city is the AI of her dog, Camus. He sounds a lot like Doug from Up, the dog that goes squirrel all the time. But aside from sounding a lot like that, Camus is actually quite an intelligent character, and his assistance will allow you to talk to a few other AIs and help you solve the problems of various characters that you'll meet in the city of Nivalis. And those people that you meet will form the basis of side quests that involve pickups and delivering other things and delivering passengers. All of it rotates around the whole idea of delivery. In a very real sense, it's a bit like Death Stranding from that perspective, but I think there's a very big difference between this and Death Stranding, because Death Stranding has a lot of emptiness. It's basically you in the world, and there's just the world around you, and you are making these deliveries from A to B, but it's just you, whereas in Cloudpunk, you're in this city and you have, in a lot of ways, the vibe of being in a slightly decrepit, slightly old, slightly corrupt city where there's a lot of people. Terry Pratchett put it best when he was describing Ankh-Morpork. It's a city of 500,000 souls and almost 1 million people. And that kind of sums up the whole vibe you get from Nivalis. As you're doing these side quests, you'll meet other characters, and you'll find out that a lot of the city can be described through the characters who live there. And I really like that aspect of the game. I think it's really interesting that it's a story-driven game where the delivery aspect, it's a vehicle, pardon the phrasing, it's the primary gameplay aspect of the game when you're in the hover and when you're on foot. But aside from that, it's not really the most important thing about the game. I know that sounds confusing. Unlike a game like Death Stranding, where you overcoming various obstacles and you overcoming the terrain and making your way from A to B to deliver your packages, that was one of the most important aspects of the game. And the storyline seemed to be secondary to that because you had all these trials and tribulations while making these deliveries. You're wading upriver, climbing over mountain and downhill and various things like that. You don't have those problems really in Cloudpunk. The deliveries are fairly straightforward for the most part. You may have the odd elevator AI who thinks that they're a demon that consumes people to deal with from time to time, but that's not really an issue that you can't resolve either. Those are fairly straightforward compared to some of the things you have to deal with in Death Stranding. What makes Cloudpunk tick is the city itself and the characters themselves. And okay, the main storyline might not be the greatest story in the world, but it is interesting. And the decisions that you make during the main storyline will affect the outcome, will affect the interactions you have with certain characters that you deal with. You can get optional story items that are scattered throughout the city, and you can just pick them up off the floor, you can buy them. You can get stuff for your apartment. You can change the speed and damage control of your HOVA. That's all fine. That's all just kind of cosmetics around the game, which kind of flesh out the game a little bit. From the very beginning of the game, you get the idea that Cloudpunk is very much a sci-fi cyberpunk game because of the look of the city of Nivalis. I mean, it is illuminated with all sorts of multicolored lights. There are neon advertisements all over the place. The sky is overcast almost perpetually. It looks like something straight out of Blade Runner or Johnny Mnemonic or any one of half a dozen cyberpunk stories I could name. It's the epitome of what you expect a futuristic cyberpunk city to look like. And driving around the city is great. Now, the game has several perspectives that are available for each mode, whether you're on foot or whether you're in your vehicle. The vehicle has the third person behind the vehicle kind of mode and also a first person driving mode on the PC. Anyway, when you're on foot, you have 3 different camera angles. There's first person, third person, and the camera pulled out. So it's a fixed perspective camera. I personally prefer the third-person perspective. I thought that was better. The art style is a kind of 3D pixel art style, and in a very weird way, it works. I'm not sure why it works, but it kind of does. It grew on me over the course of the game. Switching over to the HOVA, when you're driving the HOVA, you'll notice that it doesn't really drive that well. And you kind of have the turning circle of a train. You control your forward and reverse actions with the triggers. Up and down is controlled with the right thumbstick on the PlayStation 4, which is what I played this on. And you control your turning with your left thumbstick, obviously. And you basically go through the city with your HOVA. You'll quickly get used to piloting the vehicle. When you bump into other vehicles, and you will, or bump into buildings, or bump into signs, or bump into whatever. And I guarantee you, you will. It is not the easiest vehicle to control. And you'll have to pull in at the mechanics and have the vehicle repaired, or refill with fuel. And it would be nice if those things were a bit more prominent on the screen so that you can pay attention to them as you're driving. You'll get a lot of exposition as you're driving from A to B, and some of the distances are quite long, so you could be driving for several minutes to get from one place to another. Finding a parking spot for some of the deliveries can be a little bit annoying because the parking spot is a ways from where the delivery is, and then you have to travel from the parking spot on foot for several minutes before you can get to the place where you make the delivery. But that also gives you another chance to explore the city on foot and actually interact with other characters that maybe you might not have interacted with in that area. Be that as it may, there is an issue when you are in the HOVA and you're moving from one zone to the next. and the game basically freezes. And I thought this was just going to be a one-off, but it happened on virtually every transition from one zone to the next, and this is on the PS4 Pro. So I'm not sure what the issue is there. Maybe it's something to do with the frame rate or something like that, but it is something that can break you out of the game. Another issue is the camera transition from the HOVA. When you park the HOVA, the camera transitions to you being on the ground and being on foot. And sometimes that camera transition can be very, very clunky. It's not the smoothest thing. But then again, you know, this is an indie game, and I'm not expecting it to be on the level of something like Cyberpunk, which has millions and millions of pounds thrown at the development of it. I think that what Ironlands have done with Cloudpunk is admirable. And I will say this, a lot of people will probably unfairly make comparisons between Cloudpunk and Cyberpunk. I think that's unfair. I think Cloudpunk has a lot of its own merits. I think the aim of both games is very, very different. Rania starts as a musician. She's had to sell the house, and now she's working for Cloudpunk, even though she doesn't want to. Whereas the vibe you get from Night City and Cyberpunk is that you are in the underbelly of the city because you want to be there. The whole idea of the two games, I think, is fundamentally different. So, to sum up, I think Cloudpunk is an interesting game. I do think that it's unfair to compare it directly with Cyberpunk. Okay, there are certain comparisons that you can make. They're both set in cyberpunk science fiction cities, and they both involve the underbelly of the city in certain ways. But I think there's a fundamental difference between the two games in terms of their viewpoint, their perspective. So, if you're going to make comparisons, do so with kid gloves. Let us know what you think about Cloudpunk in the comments below, because we are always interested in what other people think. If you've liked this video, give us a thumb, a sub, or a bell. And if you want to support us, then check out our Patreon. The details are in the description. If you're after more video game chit-chat, then you can subscribe and join us every Thursday for Impossible Mission. Anyway, that's all for now, and until next time, thanks for watching.